Deepti Galohan joins me on the set for today's press review. Hi, Deepti.
Hi, Jeannie.
You're starting in India, where a state has ordered schools and colleges to shut down amid mass protesting.
Well, that's right. The southern state of Karnataka has ordered the closure of schools and colleges for 3 days. It comes after some schools refused entry to female Muslim students wearing the hijab, and this led to some protests. The authorities were citing an education ministry order. The refusal, as I said, sparked angry protesting, some of which turned violent in those colleges across the state. The newspaper The Hindu noting that the High Court now has begun hearing petitions questioning the ban on headscarves in colleges. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whose ruling BJP party also rules the state of Karnataka, has been accused of stoking violence and discriminating against religious minorities.
And there is a lot of heat against Modi in the papers today, and particularly over his increasingly authoritarian and Hindu nationalist agenda.
Well, also the timing of these protests hasn't gone unnoticed in the papers, Jeannie. There's a great article from the Indian Telegraph today, an opinion piece that notes that these protests in Karnataka come 20 years after the violence in Gujarat. Now, at that time, back in 2002, the deaths of Hindu pilgrims in a train fire were blamed on Muslims, and those violent protests led to the deaths of over 1,000 people. Narendra Modi at the time was head of the state of Gujarat, and he was accused of deliberately allowing these anti-Muslim riots in retaliation for the train fire. This opinion writer really highlights the connection between the two events, noting that after those Gujarat events in 2002, Modi became a transformed man. I quote, bellicose and daring. The writer is warning us, moreover, that we're probably only midstream in the momentous aftermath of those events today.
All right, another big story today, Deepti. The French president, after Moscow and Kiev, ended his whirlwind diplomatic tour in Berlin. What's the verdict been on that?
Well, the papers are not convinced, and they're also not convinced. It's sort of hard to put a word on it. Libération, the French left-leaning paper, notes that Macron's visits with his Russian and Ukrainian counterparts didn't produce any concrete successes in terms of the crisis in Ukraine, but he did come back with a, quote, half success. At least that's continuing dialogue with Moscow. Despite what Macron's, quote, frantic shuttle diplomacy, that's how the Washington Post calls it, Russian officials gave little sign that the French leader had really changed their minds. That's in the Washington Post.
Next now, the axing of a popular Australian soap opera, Neighbours, by its British broadcaster, has renewed calls for an Australian referendum to leave the monarchy.
You don't touch Neighbours. That's a verdict of this story. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Neighbours, it's a hugely successful, long-running Aussie soap opera set in Melbourne. It launched most famously the career of Kylie Minogue, and it has been carried by the British broadcaster Channel 5 for a long time. Well, they've decided to axe the soap in favour of what they say is more original UK drama. Since the channel foots a bill for the production costs of the series, Neighbours essentially is facing the axe now, prompting this writer from the Sydney Morning Herald to make a dramatic call. She says, Neighbours is more than Australia's signature cultural export. It's an emotional cord linking two peoples. Not for the first time the mother country abandons us. It's time we did likewise, and it's time we ditched the monarchy, she says.
And Neighbours has been going on for decades, and there's so much reflection now as well in the press on the cultural and the political significance even of the show.
Well, also the timing. So the website, The Conversation, notes that Neighbours sort of reached its peak in the late 90s with its viewers at the time likely to back Tony Blair. Like Blair, I quote, the show was safe and reassuring. Its cultural significance is important too, because Neighbours is a show about neighbors. It's about a communal spirit. It's about neighborly proximity. So the anguish around the axing of the show, perhaps ever more so prevalent in this pandemic era.
All right, just to wrap up now, Deepti, you're looking at a different story. The key to a happy relationship apparently lies in the details, at least according to one survey you found.
So this was a survey admittedly commissioned by a hotel group, Jeannie, but it did give us some interesting insight into what Britons think make a happy relationship. That includes saying I love you up to 20 times in a fortnight, 6 meaningful conversations, 3 long walks, and 2 barnstorming rows every month. It seems like a lot lot of work for a happy relationship. But the Telegraph looks at how it's not about the style. It's not about the style of the row that counts, but it's more about having an outlet to resolve problems, things like compromise and listening to your partner. There's one absolute no-no in any relationship. Don't air your dirty laundry in public. Perhaps the key to a healthy relationship lies with the German Institute's recommendation: for every negative interaction, you should have at least 5 positive interactions.
That's Deeptika Laurent with the Press Review.